cult running a school. Before we get into the nightmare that was the Jonestown school, let's talk about Jim Jones, the man behind it all. You see, Jones started the People's Temple in the 1950s as a church that pretended to preach equality and social justice. But plot twist, it was actually a full-blown cult. And like all good cult leaders, he got power-hungry, paranoid, and straight-up dangerous. By the 1970s, this deranged man had convinced over 900 people to move to the jungle in Guyana, South America, to create a utopian society. But sadly, this place was a horror movie scene just waiting to happen. He called it Jonestown. And along with forced labor, abuse, and no outside contact, Jones set up a school for the children. And guys, it was not your average classroom. Now, we can agree that most kids aren't thrilled about school, but in Jonestown, skipping class wasn't just about missing a boring history lecture. It was a literal life or death situation. Yep, if you skipped class, you die. Then, if you obviously show up, the lessons for the day would include complete and utter brainwashing. The students were fed nonstop propaganda about how Jim Jones was their savior and how America was out to get and destroy them. Think less school, more doomsday cult boot camp. After this, there'd be the suicide drills. Yep, ya heard that right. These kids weren't prepping for fire drills, but would spend all day practicing how to end themselves. Jones would make them drink a fake poison and pretend to collapse just to see if they'd obey orders when the time came. And if you dared question his authority, you'd be publicly humiliated, beaten, or locked in a coffin-sized box. The torture doesn't stop here either, because every single night, the whole of Jonestown were forced to listen to hours of Jones's ramblings over a loudspeaker, because apparently brainwashing is best served 24/7. By 1978, Jonestown was spiraling out of control, and Jones himself was losing whatever grip he had left on humanity. People could see his madness, and many wanted to leave, but Jones had total control and wasn't letting anyone go. It was literally now a hostage situation. When U.S. Congressman Leo Ryan visited to investigate reports of abuse, several Jonestown members tried to escape with him, but that was a very big mistake, because Jones sent his armed followers to ambush them, killing Ryan and 4 others. Then, realizing his cult was falling apart, this man initiated his final horrific plan by ordering 918 people, including over 300 children, to drink cyanide-laced Kool-Aid in what he called revolutionary suicide. And because the kids had practiced this for years, many obeyed without question. It was one of the largest mass deaths in history, all because one man turned a school into a death cult training camp. School's sinister secret. For years, Horace Mann was considered a golden ticket to success, a school where students were groomed for greatness. Unfortunately, some teachers took the grooming part way too literally. In 2012, a shocking investigation revealed that at least 22 teachers and administrators had sexually abused students from the 1960s through the 1990s. And we're not talking about a one-off case. This was a full-blown systemic cover-up. They managed to get away with these horrible acts for so long because of the reputation and power these abusers had. I mean, in the 1960s, who would believe a kid over a respected teacher? In fact, anytime rumors surfaced, the school's leadership swept it under the rug faster than a kid hiding bad grades from their parents. It was a well-known secret then that the school literally had a strict no snitching policy. Not officially, of course, but students who tried to report abuse were either ignored, dismissed, or gaslit into thinking they were imagining things. And if you persisted too much, things would suddenly start to fall apart in your life and studies. But everything hidden must come to light one day, because in 2012, a former Horace Mann student turned journalist named Amos Camille dropped a New York Times article that exposed the scandal to the world. This wasn't just a little expose, it was a full-on atomic bomb of truth. He mentioned names, time, location, manipulation tactics. It was detailed to the T. After this article, former students who were now adults suddenly started coming forward in waves to share horrifying stories about the teachers who preyed on vulnerable kids, the administrators who knew and did nothing, and the culture of fear that allowed abuse to thrive. Basically, Horace Mann had been running a decades-long crime ring disguised as a school. Well, you'd think this would lead to mass arrests, jail time, and justice for survivors, right? Well, wrong. Because thanks to statute of limitations laws, most of the abusers got away with it. Basically, what this meant was that by the time the truth came out, it was legally too late to prosecute them. Talk about a legal loophole big enough to drive a school bus through. Instead, the school issued a public apology because, that totally fixes everything. Eventually, they paid over $12 million in settlements to victims, but many survivors argued that no amount of money could make up for what they endured. The Atlanta Public Schools cheating scandal. All right, pop quiz, hotshot. What's the one thing that every teacher warns you to never do? A. Forget your homework. B. Write your entire essay using ChatGPT. C. Cheat. If you picked C, well, then you're smarter than the 178 teachers and administrators in Atlanta Public Schools, APS, who got caught rigging test scores in one of the biggest education scandals in U.S. history. This time it wasn't the students sneaking answers from a friend, but the teachers and school officials cheating on behalf of their students. You see, back in the early 2000s, schools across the U.S. were under serious pressure to improve student test scores, thanks to a policy called No Child Left Behind, NCLB. The idea behind NCLB was simple. If your students performed high in their tests, your school would automatically get more funding. And, well, low test scores equals little to no funding, and teachers might actually lose their jobs. Basically, schools had everything to gain by scoring high, and everything to lose if students failed. So, in Atlanta, where many schools were struggling, some educators decided to take a creative approach to fixing the problem. Now, instead of actually helping students learn, which, is their job, some teachers and principals literally erased wrong answers and filled in the correct ones after students had turned in their tests. And it wasn't just a couple of rogue teachers. It was widespread across the district. At least 44 schools were involved, and teachers even held secret erasure parties where they would sit together and fix answers with pencils. Just imagine how funny it would be to see a group of adults huddled over desks whispering, "Okay, switch that B to a C. Erase that D. This kid deserves an A. We're not cheating. We're strategically improving education." Now, you'd think altering thousands of test scores would be easy to hide, but as every student who's ever tried to sneak a glance at their neighbor's test knows, cheating always catches up with you. And it definitely caught up with them. You see, experts noticed that Atlanta's test scores had skyrocketed out of nowhere. Some students went from failing to near perfect overnight, which is about as believable as someone suddenly going from couch potato to Olympic sprinter in a week. Then there were the anonymous tips hinting at what was going on behind closed doors. Add this to a full-blown investigation ordered by Georgia's governor. Safe to say, the results were damning. The report found that 178 educators were involved, including 38 principals. Over 80+ confessed to tampering with tests, and even worse, some teachers said they were pressured by their bosses to cheat. One teacher even claimed she was told, "Get those scores up or get out." Once the scandal broke, heads started rolling. And no, this wasn't just a slap on the wrist situation. People actually went to jail. Beverly Hall, the former superintendent of APS, was indicted for racketeering and conspiracy, but she passed away from cancer before she could be sentenced. 11 educators were convicted in 2015, with some sentenced to prison time. But at the end of the day, the real victims were the kids. Many students who had great test scores actually weren't prepared for the next grade level. If you think what happened was wrong and you enjoyed this video, please subscribe. Thanks. Mwah. Doctor betraying trust. So, basically, Dr. George Tyndall was a gynecologist at USC's Student Health Center for nearly 30 years. The The guy was supposed to be helping female students with their reproductive health, but instead, he spent 3 decades being an absolute creep, allegedly sexually abusing hundreds of patients. Over the years, hundreds of women came forward with eerily similar stories about their experiences with Tyndall. Patients reported that he performed pelvic exams without gloves. He would often drag out the exams unnecessarily, touching patients in ways that weren't medically necessary. Some victims said he would insert his fingers for prolonged periods while making inappropriate comments. Yeah, medical professionals are trained to be quick and professional, not creepy and invasive. Then there was the fact that Tyndall allegedly made inappropriate remarks about students' bodies and their sex lives. He often asked personal, sexually intrusive questions that had nothing to do with medical care. One patient reported that he called her the perfect girlfriend because she was a virgin. Another said he made remarks about Asian women being tight. Multiple women said Tyndall took pictures of their genitals without their permission. He claimed it was for medical research or to document conditions, but in most cases, there was no legitimate reason for the photos. Basically, women left his office feeling violated, confused, and ashamed. The craziest part is that he actually got away with this unethical, gross behavior for 30 years, simply as a result of systematic cover-ups, institutional failure, and a shocking lack of accountability. In fact, the earliest reports of misconduct dated back to the 1990s, but nothing happened, and even when nurses, medical assistants, and even patients reported concerns about his behavior, USC still kept him on staff. It was literally willful negligence. Finally, in 2016, USC launched an internal investigation, but the kicker is they never told students about it. They never reported it to the authorities, and they let him quietly retire in 2017 without a payout. So the creep was never publicly disciplined, never fired for misconduct, and never reported to the medical board. The university essentially helped him escape consequences just so they wouldn't face bad publicity. But no evil deed goes unpunished, because in 2018, journalists from the LA Times published an explosive investigation exposing USC's years of negligence and Tyndall's pattern of abuse. The report included testimonies from dozens of women detailing their experiences, evidence that USC knew about the abuse for years but kept quiet, and details of how Tyndall was allowed to resign quietly instead of being prosecuted. Guess what? The fallout was immediate, as hundreds of new victims came forward. The USC president, C.L. Max Nikias, was forced to resign, and even the FBI and LAPD launched criminal investigations. Finally, in June 2019, just 1 year later, the abuser Tyndall was finally arrested and charged with 29 felony counts of sexual penetration and battery by fraud, and over 700 women joined a class action lawsuit against USC. USC ultimately paid over $1.1 billion in settlements, which, to date, is still one of the largest sex abuse settlements in U.S. history. School-prison experiment. In 1971, a psychologist named Dr. Philip Zimbardo at Stanford University decided to run an experiment to see how people behaved when placed in positions of power and submission. And his idea was simple: recruit 24 college students and split them into 2 groups. Half would be prison guards and would be given uniforms, sunglasses, and batons, but told not to use physical violence, while the other half would be prisoners, given prison uniforms and locked up in a fake jail built in the basement of Stanford's psychology department. Yeah, what could possibly go wrong? For 2 weeks, the students were supposed to play along and see what happens. Well, they definitely played along. At first, it was all fun and games, like an escape room, but without the escape part. The guards were a little strict, but mostly chill. The prisoners followed the rules. Everyone was awkwardly figuring out their roles, and Zimbardo probably thought the experiment was going well. But then, human nature said, "Hold my beer." By day 2, things went from pretend prison to these guys actually think they're running a real penitentiary. The guards realized they had total control and started getting creative with punishments. The prisoners started rebelling, refusing to listen and mocking the guards, and the guards responded by going full dictator mode, making prisoners do push-ups, sleep on the floor, and stripping them of their mattresses for fun. It was gradually becoming a hostage situation. By now, the guards were really getting into character. And by getting into character, I mean they turned into full-blown tyrants. The prisoners were humiliated and sleep-deprived. Some were even forced to clean toilets with their bare hands. So much for a summer research gig. The guards used psychological tactics to divide and conquer, turning prisoners against each other. It got so bad that one prisoner had a full-blown breakdown and had to be removed from the experiment, which, by the way, should have been a major red flag. But guess what? Zimbardo kept up with his experiment. Eventually, on day 5, a Stanford graduate student named Christina Maslach came to check out the experiment. And after taking one look at the whole situation, she called out Zimbardo for letting things get so twisted. Well, with half the prisoners having mental breakdowns and the guards enjoying their power way too much, Zimbardo shut the whole thing down after just 6 days. That's right, a study meant to last 2 weeks collapsed in less than a week because human nature went full Lord of the Flies. The Stanford prison experiment became one of the most famous and controversial psychological studies ever, and it ultimately proved one thing: power corrupts fast. People will do crazy things when they're in a role of authority, even if it's fake. And please, if your psychology experiment starts looking like a war crime, maybe shut it down sooner. College scam scheme. This all started when a guy named Rick Singer, who honestly sounds like he should be a used car salesman, ran a secret side door admission scheme. He convinced rich parents that if they paid him big bucks, he could guarantee their kids got into top universities like Harvard, Yale, Stanford, and USC. Basically, if they scratched his back, he'd scratch theirs. Note that the cash wasn't just a regular donation, but was straight up fraud. So instead of the students getting in the old-fashioned way, like actually studying and putting in the work, these kids were faking athletic credentials, cheating on entrance exams, and buying their way into college teams they had no business being on. Imagine spending years studying, pulling all-nighters, stressing over SATs, and writing the perfect college essay, only to find out that some rich kid got into your dream school because their mommy and daddy pulled out their checkbook. Yeah, exactly. To make this scandal even crazier, 2 Hollywood stars, Lori Loughlin, aka Aunt Becky from Full House, and her husband paid $500,000 to get their daughters into USC as fake rowing recruits. Even though the daughter in question, Olivia Jade, was a YouTuber who literally said, and I quote, "I don't really care about school, I just want to party." Then, Felicity Huffman from the show Desperate Housewives dropped $15,000 to rig her daughter's SAT scores. As rumors of this continued to spread, the FBI got involved and the whole scheme collapsed faster than a bad house of cards. 50+ people were charged, including wealthy parents, college coaches, and test administrators. Rick Singer flipped faster than a pancake and basically helped the FBI take down everyone involved. Actress Lori Loughlin got 2 months in prison while Felicity Huffman served just 11 days. That's barely enough time to finish a Netflix series. Honestly, if your parents have to bribe someone to get you into college, maybe, just maybe, you shouldn't be going there in the first place. I just can't believe they took down Aunt Becky. I would think that they would have mercy. Anyone get that Full House joke? No?